What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Real American Politics, back in with a new video, and today, it is time that we do a subject that I've wanted to do a video on for quite a while now, and I think this is a perfect time because, well, the primary season's about done. Well, there's a couple primaries here and there, but nothing really interesting outside of, like, Wyoming and a couple Florida races. This is, in my opinion, a video that I've wanted to do, and I think, honestly, this is the perfect time to do it since it's kind of slow going around for election stuff, and I think it's a good topic. Now, before I forget, of course, I hope you enjoy these type of videos. If you do, smash that like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, and yes, of course, go follow the mysterious Twitter account in the description down below, and yeah. Also join the channel. That is right, folks, for just 10 cents a day, you can join Real American Politics. I think it's a good deal, and I recommend you join it today. Alright, so this is a subject I've wanted to talk about because there's a couple of misconceptions going around about, a certain voting bloc. I'm, of course, talking about the Trumplicans. I know that sounds like kind of a meme name, but they're an actual voting group that I don't think gets discussed enough, and when they do, people really don't understand them. So if you don't know, Trumplican voters are quote-unquote Republican voters, which we'll get to that in a second, who Trump has the most influence over in primaries. Now, a lot of people just, generically think, oh, white working class voters. To a lesser extent, that is true, but there is a specific group of working class voters, right, that are Trumplicans that, well, Trump has the most sway over. And we're going to discuss that today. I know this may be a little bit off topic for, election stuff, but I wanted to give my take on these Trumplican voters and why there's still a lot of room to grow with these type of voters. There's a ton of room. So much so that you start doing the math, it's like you could get crushed in places like Tarrant County, Collin County, Texas, and you still would win the state of Texas if you actually get off your high horse and, start getting these voters, still by possibly double digits. So there's still a shot for Republicans to grow with these type of voters and all that good stuff. So Trumplican voters are not, just white working class voters. Well, they mostly are. And they're working class voters of all races. That's just a fact. Now, there is a map that really, I think, demonstrates the best who these voters are specifically, because white working class voters, there's been a ton of them in places like, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, etc., that were voting Republican years before Donald Trump. Even places like Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, etc. There were a ton of white working class voters, even in this region, that were voting Republican. But the white working class vote that really has swung to the Republicans is, of course, in the Rust Belt and Mid-Atlantic for Pennsylvania. The 5 states that Trump flipped in 2020 or 2016, they have a ton of Trumplicans. This map is the best demonstration of who these voters are. They're voters that voted for Obama in 2008, Obama in 2012, but flipped to Trump in 2016. And of course, there's a couple counties that, voted for Obama twice, voted for Clinton in 2016, but flipped to Trump in 2020. Places like Mahoning County, Ohio. Places in southern Texas, etc. But these voters are really the first Trumplican voters. Now, you look at where these voters are. They're, of course, mostly in the driftless region of the Midwest. This has historically been a very working class, very populist, nationalist part of the country. And for years, Democrats were winning these voters by ridiculous margins. I mean, you look at some of these numbers, well, we'll get to a certain county over here. These voters constantly voted heavily for Democrats, both down ballot and up ballot. And I know they voted Republican like the 70s. It's a weird situation, but since the 80s, these voters have been part of the Democrat stronghold, and why Republicans just could not win places like Wisconsin. I mean, you look at Wisconsin, remember, Bush got like 70% of Waukesha. He had ridiculous numbers in southeastern Wisconsin. The problem? He did not perform well in the rurals, alright? Northern Wisconsin, he barely won. But this region here didn't go so well for him. Yet Trump, who basically did the worst a Republican candidate has done in Waukesha in decades, was still able to flip the state because of this. The entirety of the state trended extremely Republican, and he was able to get absurd turnout in these rural working class areas that for years were Democrat voters. Now, people are going to think, oh, well, if they're Democrat voters, they must be socially liberal. I mean, there's some people on Twitter that really believe that nonsense. These voters, on economic issues, yes, they are, what I would say, bit more left-leaning. They're against free trade. They're for immigration restrictionism, and they're fine with stuff like Social Security. But they're not socially liberal. Most of these voters are socially traditional conservative voters, and that's why people like Al Gore were able to perform fairly well. Bill Clinton also in this region. They were socially moderate Democrats. That's just a fact. I mean, Al Gore wasn't a big fan of abortion either. I mean, just look at his social stances. But the point is, these voters are socially conservative. But the Democrats have, well, moved God knows where at this point. They're so far left on social issues. They're anti-American. They're essentially anti-white. And these voters have begun this trend Republican because of that, but also economic issues, like I said. Now, you notice here, these counties, in 2016 especially, they were tilt red. I mean, look at this. 50%, 50%, 49%, 50%. These are rookie numbers. And you start doing some math and you realize, wait, the demographics of these counties are very similar to those in Appalachia, which before Trump was already becoming a Republican stronghold. Trump kind of just solidified that. But the point is, these voters are extremely similar to those in Appalachia. Now, the reason that Republicans still have room to grow here is, well, economic issues. If Republicans were to embrace the ideas of economic nationalism fully, not just grift on it, fully embrace, like, you know what, we're going to stand up for the American worker, we're going to reduce immigration, and we're going to fight for your retirement, all right? Now, again, people may say Social Security is bad. That's an argument for a different day, but point is, these voters, they're fine with stuff like Social Security. And I am too, personally. But point is, these voters, if Republicans were to fully embrace economic nationalism, they would vote like these voters in Appalachia. Now, there's, of course, before I end today's video, another wave of Trumplican voters. Obviously, you had what happened in the Midwest in 2016. But what happened in 2020? I don't have the map up. In southern Texas and Miami-Dade, etc., was the second wave of Trumplican voters. That is right, folks, the Hispanic realignment. Now, we thought it was just white working class voters that were swinging hard to the right. Well, combine that with Hispanic working class voters now. What happened in 2020 shocked everybody, including me. I knew Trump was going to do better in southern Texas and Miami-Dade when you really look at the education demographics of these voters. But he won. I think it was Zapata or Stark County, one of these two. The point is, yeah, I think it was Zapata. The point is, he got extreme numbers for Republicans. I mean, seriously, he almost flipped. Yeah, I think it was Zapata County. This was a county that hasn't voted Republican in over 100 years. And Trump flipped that. Or it could be Stark County. You get the point. The point is, these voters on economic issues are surprisingly close to those in the Midwest. You look at them, they're pretty much the same on economics. They may be a bit more left-leaning. I mean, a lot of them came from places, from Latin America, or I should say most of these voters have been here for years. But you get the point. The point is, these voters on economics are surprisingly close to those in the Midwest. But a thing in recent years is these voters have become more in line with those voters on social issues. That's a big one. These voters have become you know, more American over the years. Obviously, they've been here for generations at this point. And as everybody knows, the further away from you're from the first generation, the more Republican these voters become. And I think a lot of these voters, I think it's fourth generation now, or more, I think, at this point. And you see that big time. I mean, places like Hidalgo County, Starr County, Cameron County, Willesee County, Jim Hogg, Brooks, Zapata, Webb County, etc. They became more naturalized, and they swung heavy Republican as they become more in line with our values. And these voters, I mean, they're pretty much the same on pretty much everything except, they're Hispanic voters on nearly all the issues. And this is a gold mine. This is there's so many votes you could potentially get from these voters. You get a place like El Paso, there's a chunk of vote you could get from. So this idea that Republicans have to somehow go back 20 years just to win a place like Tarrant, you're never winning Tarrant by 70 points again. You're just not. This country, or especially a place like Tarrant, have changed so dramatically that even if you ran Bush again, he wouldn't get anywhere close to where he got. There's so many new voters in this county that are left-leaning voters, not in the, traditional way like Midwestern voters. Flat out, there's so many voters that are left-leaning on social and economic issues that have flooded this county, that they just vote Democrat no matter what. Run Bush again, and any Bush, in fact, they would get like maybe 52% of the vote here. It's just a fact. So I hope everybody understands my point that there's so many voters in this part of Texas, even a place like Houston, a place like El Paso, even San Antonio, there's a chunk. There's so many votes here that if you do the math, it can basically replace the extreme margin Republicans for years were getting in places like Tarrant, Denton, Collin, etc. And I think it's worth it. It's more of a long-term play. As the Hispanic vote becomes a larger share of the population, it's a fact. It's a matter of fact. It's true. When these voters become more and more of the population, if they become more and more a Republican, well, do some basic math. You benefit long-term electorally. Now, I'm not saying, shill on immigration. These voters prove that you don't have to be, amnesty. That Trump kind of proved that. These voters are fine with immigration restrictionism. But the point is, folks, if you just stand your ground on cultural issues and embrace stuff like economic nationalism, you can really win a lot of these voters over. They're very similar to those in the Midwest, and we saw that in 2020. Anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share it with your friends, hit that little bell, and yes, of course, go follow the mysterious Twitter account in the description down below. And, yeah, I know this was a different type of video, but I kind of wanted to do it. Anyways, folks, we'll see you guys in the next video. Godspeed to all of you.